Hey, it's Sheas Social Studies.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Sheas Social Studies. So as we previously discussed, after the American Revolution, the economy in the United States was the pits. There was price control and inflation that affected many Americans, especially the farmers. Remember that since the founding of our nation, colonists, settlers, and now Americans were farmers. However, there was a clear and distinct difference about what farmers were being affected by the poor economy. Northern farmers usually had smaller farms than that of the large plantations in the South. Also, northern farmers would pay workers to help them harvest their crops, while southern planters used the enslaved Africans to harvest theirs, the slaves. So it's no surprise that the rebellions that occurred in the United States happened in the northern states. In this case, what we're going to cover is Massachusetts. Some of the farmers that were the hardest hit were members of the Continental Army and veterans of the Revolutionary War. As we discussed previously, again, soldiers and veterans would not get paid very often, and when it did, it was with a worthless paper currency called the Continental. The Continental, remember, was backed by a promise of future revenues raised by taxes, which never happened. American banks decided that they would not loan farmers any more money to support their farms, and to make matters worse, because of the economic crisis, banks started to demand repayment from these previous loans. Farmers could not pay any of the loans, and the courts in Massachusetts began to foreclose on farms. When foreclosure happens, the banks and the court system work together to take a person's property when payment is not being made. So after the war, men like Daniel Shay, who was a Revolutionary War veteran and a farmer in western Massachusetts, was expected to pay overdue taxes even though he did not receive much money from his service. With no money to improve his farms or pay high debts or these heavy taxes, northern farmers like Shay began to have their farms foreclosed and repossessed or taken away from them. This is what the main cause of Shays Rebellion was about: the repayment of those high taxes, those big debts, and the foreclosure and repossession of farms. Groups of farmers began to organize and protest these high debts and heavy taxes, and decided to elect Daniel Shay as their leader. Now, Shay was a captain during the American Revolution and was well suited for this task. He had lost his property due to unpaid debts and overdue taxes, and would be willing to be the leader of what today is now known as Shays Rebellion. In August 1786, Shays and a group of farmers petitioned the courts for financial help to pay the overdue debts and keep their farms afloat. The state legislators refused to take any action on any of the petitions and began to foreclose on properties anyway. This action angered the farmers, who organized protests against the courts to stop any future repossessions. And on August 29, 1786, Shays Rebellion began. Shays and several hundred followers called regulators surrounded and protested the court in Springfield, Massachusetts, with the premise that if the courts could not open, then they could not foreclose on any of the farms. The courts in Massachusetts called the federal government to aid in stopping the rebellions, and there was no response. Remember that under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government could not do two things. It could not raise an army, or it could not tax the states for revenue, so there was nothing that the federal government can do. Now, Shays had some success protesting the courts and saving some farms, and as momentum grew, Shays and his regulators decided to attack an arsenal. In December of 1786, the governor of Massachusetts was finally able to raise a militia of about 1,200 men to attempt and eradicate the rebellion. And in January of 1787, Shays and a force of 1,200 men attacked the arsenal in Springfield, Massachusetts, and was met with the Massachusetts militia. Shays and his arsenal attack failed, and Daniel Shays was arrested and sentenced to death by the Supreme Court of Massachusetts. Shays' rebellion was not restricted to only one protest, and it lasted a few months, wreaking havoc across Massachusetts, and still the state decided to issue a pardon or forgiveness to Shays and his men. Shays Rebellion brought to light the poor financial condition of the country and the weakness of the federal government under the Articles of Confederation. A major effect of this rebellion is that the American public began to call for a federal government that was much stronger and able to help the states when it was needed. So in 1787, delegates called for the Constitutional Convention to attempt to fix the weaknesses under the Articles of Confederation, but wind up scrapping it in favor of a new constitution. So Shays Rebellion was a very important rebellion, a very important conflict, because it showed the nation how weak our government was, and it showed how much the farmers, the people who were building America, were suffering because of this poor economic condition. All right, we'll see you next time.